Today, we're diving into something called courtly love. It was this really fascinating and honestly kind of strange set of rules for romance that was a huge deal back in the Middle Ages. Seriously, what if having a crush came with an actual rulebook? Instead of all the guesswork, you'd have a clear step-by-step guide on how to go about admiring someone. Sounds wild, right? Well, for the knights and ladies of medieval Europe, that was pretty much their reality. So, what exactly was courtly love? Well, at its heart, it was this whole code of conduct for romance. It was all about nobility, chivalry, and a knight secretly admiring a lady, usually one of high status. It wasn't just about having feelings for someone. Oh no. It was more like a performance, a game with very, very strict rules. Okay, so first up, a different kind of love. And to get this, we really have to adjust our thinking. This wasn't just old school dating, it was a completely different way of looking at relationships, and it had a totally unique goal. So, where did this all come from? Well, you have to go way back, like over 900 years ago, to the fancy aristocratic courts in southern France. And it's no accident that it started there. See, while a lot of Europe was caught up in constant fighting, this particular region was pretty peaceful and wealthy. That meant they had time for things like art, poetry, and developing, really refined manners. It was basically the perfect breeding ground for a new, super sophisticated idea of love. Now, this is probably the biggest twist, the thing that's hardest for us to get our heads around. The goal of courtly love, it was almost never marriage. Nope, the real point was self-improvement. The whole idea was that by devoting yourself to this amazing, noble lady, you'd be inspired to become a better person, more honorable, more brave, more everything. Love was seen as a way to level up your character. All right, let's talk about the main characters in this whole drama. It's like a play, and you've got three key roles. First up, you have the lady, and she was literally placed on a pedestal. She was seen as this perfect, graceful, almost angelic figure. And here's the kicker. She was almost always of a higher social status and, get this, often already married to some powerful lord. That made her completely off limits, totally unattainable, which was actually a really important part of the game. Then, of course, you have the knight, and his whole mission in life was to serve the lady with absolute devotion. It was kind of like how a vassal, that's a loyal follower, would pledge their life to a king or a lord. The knight had to prove he was worthy of her attention by being super brave, totally honorable, and maybe even writing a few good poems. Her approval was everything. And last but not least, we've got the troubadours. You can basically think of these guys as the pop stars or the TikTok influencers of the Middle Ages. They were these traveling poet-musicians who went from castle to castle singing songs all about courtly love. And honestly, they're the main reason this whole trend went viral across Europe. Okay, so now for the rules of the game. How did all of this actually work? Because, believe me, there were very specific rules and stages you had to follow. The whole system was built on one huge idea: chivalry. Now, you've probably heard that word. It was the knight's code of conduct. But it wasn't just about being a good fighter. It was about being loyal, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, and being, polite and respectful. And loving a lady in this specific way, that was seen as a major part of what made a knight truly chivalrous. And the path of love itself had four distinct stages. Think of it like leveling up. First, there's the glimpse, basically love at first sight. Then comes stage 2, the suffering. This is where the knight secretly pines for her, all angsty and full of longing. If he gets brave enough, he moves to stage 3, the declaration. But he doesn't just go up and talk to her. No way. He reveals his feelings through a poem or a song. And if she accepts, he reaches the final level, the service, where he becomes her official, devoted suitor. And the way they talked about love, it was so dramatic, super over the top. Poets would compare love to being sick or like an out-of-control fire. But here's something that was actually revolutionary. They wrote all this stuff in the vernacular. That's just a fancy word for the everyday language people actually spoke. Not in Latin, which only priests and scholars could read. This was a game changer because it meant everyone in the court could understand these stories. And the ideas spread like a burning fire. But out of all the rules, there was one that was number one, absolutely non-negotiable. Discretion. It had to be a secret. Remember, the lady was usually married. If anyone found out, it could lead to a massive scandal and totally ruin her reputation. So you had lovers meeting in secret, passing hidden notes, and all that danger just made the whole thing even more intense and exciting. So how on earth did this idea, which started in one little corner of France, go completely viral across an entire continent? Well, it was a mix of some very influential people and what was basically medieval pop culture. Yeah, this definitely didn't happen overnight. It all kicks off in the late 11th century in southern France. Then, through the 12th century, you have those troubadours traveling all over spreading the word. In the mid 12th century, a super powerful woman gives it a huge push, bringing it to France and England. And then, eventually, as the world changed, the traditions started to fade out. And that powerful woman we mentioned, that was Eleanor of Aquitaine. This woman was a total powerhouse. She was queen of two different countries, first France and then England. I mean, talk about a royal influencer. She was a huge fan of the arts, and she's the one who's really credited with taking the culture of courtly love from her home in southern France and making it fashionable in the major courts of northern Europe. Big public events were also super important for spreading the idea. Think of tournaments. They were like the Super Bowl of chivalry. They were these huge festivals where knights got to show off their jousting skills. It was the perfect place to put courtly love on display. A knight would wear something his lady gave him, maybe a scarf or a ribbon, and dedicate his entire performance to her honor, right there in front of everyone. Okay, so this all sounds like something from a dusty old history book, right? But what's really wild is how much the ideas from courtly love have stuck around and still shape how we think about romance today. Let's just look at a few comparisons. Back then, a knight would serve the lady. Today, we talk about being a supportive partner. They wrote epic poems. We send long, heartfelt texts. They would fight for her honor. We might give flowers or gifts to show we care. Even little things like holding a door open, you can trace that impulse all the way back to this medieval code of chivalry. Seriously, its legacy is everywhere once you start looking for it. The actual word romance, it comes from the languages these stories were first told in. Think about almost any movie where the hero has to go on a quest or fight to win someone's love. That's basically a modern courtly love story. And that core idea that love should make you want to be a better person, that's still a huge part of how we think about relationships. Which leaves us with one final, pretty interesting question to think about. After all this time, hundreds and hundreds of years later, when it comes to romance, are we still, in some ways, playing by their rules?